Dubrow Suspicion Files.
You know, sometimes the biggest, most complicated stories, they start with something really, really simple. In this case, it all comes down to a single, brutal number. A number that kicked off one of the most famous crimes and, yeah, one of the most famous books of the entire 20th century. It all starts right here.
$40. That's it. That is all the killers walked away with. After everything they did, just 40 bucks. The entire haul from the Clutter family home on the night they were murdered. It's just unbelievable when you really stop and think about it.
So you have 4 lives for $40. The math just doesn't add up, right? It makes absolutely no sense. But here's the thing. The real tragedy, the one that kind of spirals out over years, it actually involves a 5th person. The man who decided to tell this story and ended up paying a price that was all his own. Okay, so let's set the scene. We're going back to Saturday, November 14th, 1959. The place is Holcomb, Kansas. And you have to picture it. This was a quiet, really trusting town, the kind of place where nobody locked their doors. A place that, well, after this one day, it would pretty much cease to exist. So first, let's meet the family. This is the patriarch, Herb Clutter. Think of him as the anchor, not just for his family, but for the whole community. A really successful farmer, super well regarded. And here's a key detail. Everyone knew he did business on credit. He just never, ever kept cash in the house. And then there was his wife, Bonnie, a really gentle soul, but she was struggling. Quietly, with what they called clinical depression back then. And on her very last afternoon, she was just doing this simple, sweet thing in her room, showing her little collection of miniatures to a neighbor girl. Meanwhile, down in the basement, you've got their son, Kenyon. He's only 15, and he's just doing what teenage boys do, right? He's tinkering around, working on some carpentry project, totally lost in his own little world. And then there was Nancy, 16. She was really the vibrant heart of the whole family. And her last Saturday, it was just so normal. She baked a cherry pie, even taught a neighbor girl how to make one. She was on the phone with her best friend, probably talking about her boyfriend. Just a perfectly, beautifully normal day. And this, right here, is so important to understand. The real horror of this whole thing isn't just the crime itself. It's the interruption. It's the fact that a life, a family's life, that's filled with all these simple, wonderful moments, baking pies, chatting on the phone, working on a project, that all of that could just be wiped out for basically no reason at all. So as the Clutters are living out this last, perfectly normal day, something else is happening. 2 completely separate things, actually, hundreds of miles away. And they are on a collision course, aimed right at this family who has absolutely no idea what's coming. Okay, so thread number 1, it starts in a prison cell. You've got this guy, a former farmhand for Herb Clutter, who's trying to sound tough, a big shot. And he tells his cellmate, a guy named Dick Hickok, this story. It's a total lie. He says Herb Clutter has a safe in his house with 10 grand in cash. But there was no safe, and there was no cash. It didn't matter, though. The lie was enough. It was enough to spark a plan. Now for thread number 2. It starts with this, just a tiny 300-word article buried deep inside the New York Times. It's super dry, just the facts. But for one particular person reading it in New York City, it was like a lightning bolt. And that reader? Yep, it was the famous author Truman Capote. See, Capote had this big idea. He'd been hunting for the perfect story to create a whole new genre he was calling the nonfiction novel. And when he saw that little article, he saw more than just a crime. He saw a story about the end of American innocence, and he just knew he had to get to Kansas. So fast forward a bit, the police investigation eventually leads them to Dick Hickok and his partner, Perry Smith. And once they're caught, once they're on trial, this is where the story takes this really dark psychological twist, because this is the moment Truman Capote finally comes face to face with the killers. And when Capote meets Perry Smith, it's like he's looking in a dark mirror. It's actually kind of chilling. I mean, look at this. Both had these awful childhoods. Both were basically abandoned by their families. Both were these sensitive, artistic types who felt like outsiders. It was like they were 2 sides of the very same coin. Someone later described them perfectly as opposite twins.
For Capote, Perry was everything he could have become. He was the darkness, the failure, the anger that Capote had spent his whole life trying to escape. And this connection, it became a complete obsession. But it was also the key that unlocked the whole story for him. All right, so March 1960, Dick and Perry are found guilty. Sentenced to death, they get shipped off to death row. And then nothing. Everybody just waits. The story just kind of grinds to a halt. And this timeline really shows you just how long we're talking about. It wasn't weeks or months. We're talking 1 year, 2 years, 3, a full 5 years. 5 years of legal appeals, of execution dates getting pushed back. Imagine that. 5 years of the killers just sitting on death row, and 5 years of Truman Capote stuck with this incredible story that had no ending. So just for a second, put yourself in Capote's shoes, right? You've poured years of your life into this. You've got thousands of pages of notes. You've even formed this really intense, complicated bond with one of the murderers. But you can't publish your masterpiece, not until they die. What do you do? And this is really the moral crossroads of the whole thing. Because Capote, who had become a kind of friend to Perry, starts rooting for the appeals to fail. He needed them to die so he could finish his book. And suddenly that title, In Cold Blood, it stopped being just about the killers, and it started being about the author, too. It's pretty chilling. Finally, on April 14th, 1965, the legal road runs out. No more appeals. The executions are happening. And Truman Capote, he's there. He's an official witness, there to watch the whole thing unfold. He stood there and watched Dick Hickok die. And then he watched Perry Smith, his opposite twin, his dark mirror, walk to the gallows. And right before the end, after saying a few words against capital punishment, Perry offered 2 final words. I am sorry. So Capote finally had his ending. The book, In Cold Blood, comes out, and the success is just astronomical. I mean, it made him incredibly rich, incredibly famous, probably the most famous writer in America at that point. On the surface, it was everything he had ever wanted. But what was the price for all that success? This, a big, fat 0. That's the number of books Truman Capote finished for the rest of his life. The very thing that made him also completely and utterly broke him. A friend of his later said that something inside of Truman died on the gallows, right alongside Perry Smith. After the book, he just spiraled into drugs, alcohol, completely haunted by what he'd been a part of. So it leaves us with this one final question. In his desperate, all-consuming need for an ending to his story, did Truman Capote actually become the final victim of that terrible day in Holcomb?